Hello children, hope you all are fit and fine at your home and also are studying through these notes and videos and not wasting the time and also completing your notes on time because you all have to submit your notes on the given date and the time that is sent to you already. So now let's start the next topic of the chapter 2 is matter around us, pure chemistry. In the earlier video, what we have studied? Yes, we have studied up to the classification of matter on its chemical nature. That is matter divided into two parts, pure and impure substance. Pure substance is again divided into two parts, element and compound. Then element is divided into three parts, that is metal, non-metals and metalloids. So in the previous video we have studied up to metal definitions. No. So what do you mean by metals? Yes, of course I know that you are also telling. Metals are those substance, those elements which are malleable, which are ductile and also are good conductor of electricity and always have the tendency to make positive ions. So now let's start the properties, physical properties of matter, as you have already studied this in class 8, but once again we will recapitulate all these things. Okay, so physical property of matter. First, metals are malleable. Metals are malleable, that means metals can be easily drawn into thin sheet. Okay, means whenever they hammered, they can be drawn into thin and thinner sheet. That's why they can be used in several sweet items or for packing of different types of food materials. Like children, the most common malleable metals are gold and silver, but beside that aluminium and copper are also very much malleable metals, but almost all the metals are showing the property of malleability, and whenever they are drawn into thin and thinner sheet, that sheet is called foils. As you have already seen, maybe the silver foil, working of silver foil on sweet for the decoration, or the aluminium foil is used for wrapping biscuits or other food materials like that. So malleability means the ability of a metal or any element to draw into thin sheet, that is called malleability, and all metals are malleable. Now comes to this second point, metals are ductile. That means metals can also be drawn into thin wires. Whenever they can hammer, they can be drawn into thin wires, and the best ductile metals are, yes, of course, gold and silver, but beside that all metals are also showing the ductility nature. Okay, they can be drawn into thin wires. Now third is metals are good conductor of heat and electricity. Yes children, all the metals are very good conductor of heat and electricity. That means they are allowing the heat and electricity to pass through them. Okay, they provide a very little resistance and they are allowing the maximum amount of heat and electricity to pass through them. That's why they are the good conductor of heat and electricity. Now comes to this one, metals are lustrous, can be polished. So lustrous means luster, the metallic luster. All the metals are having metallic luster. That means they are shiny in their appearance. If you see the upper portion of the metals, they are having luster, shiny appearance. Okay, but yes, of course, some metals loses its shiny appearance with time and they can be polished again. Now comes to the fifth property, that is metals are generally hard. Children, yes, of course, metals are very hard. If you see iron, if you see gold, copper, aluminium, silver, these all are very hard, cannot be scratched easily. But there is some exception. That is, exception is sodium and potassium. Yes, Na is the symbol of sodium and K is the symbol of potassium. Sodium and potassium are very soft metal and they can be easily cut with a knife. Okay, so that's why this sodium and potassium is the exception. They are not very hard. Now comes to the sixth property, metals have high tensile strength. High tensile strength means metals are very strong. They can bear heavy load. Okay, if you put a heavy load on it, they are having the ability to bear it. So that is the quality of having high tensile strength. and iron, osmium, gold, silver, these all are having high tensile strength. That's why iron is used in making building, bridges, all these things. Okay, but exception is there, like that sodium and potassium. Exception is sodium and potassium. They are having low tensile strength. They cannot bear heavy load. Now comes to this one. Metals are solid at room temperature. Metals are solid at room temperature. That means all the metals in the normal room temperature exist in solid form except only one metal, that is mercury. Yes, thermometric liquid. Okay. Mercury is the only metal which exists in liquid in the room temperature. Except mercury, all the metals are solid at normal room temperature. So here, exception is Hg. Hg means mercury. Okay, it is a symbol of mercury. Now comes to this one. Metals have high melting and boiling point. Yes, students, metals are having high melting and boiling point. That means they melt and vaporize at a very high temperature. They are having high melting and boiling point. Now comes to this one. Metals have high densities. So densities means they are heavier. Okay, they are not floating in water. Instead, they are sinking in water because they are having high densities. All the metals are having high densities. Now, the 10th one is metals are sonorous. Sonority means metals produce ringing sound whenever strike on its surface. If you strike on its surface, they will produce ringing sound. That's why metals are used as a bell in temples, are also used as strings in guitar and sitar, like that. Now comes to 11 point, that is metals are usually have a silver or grey color. Yes, children, the color of the metal are generally grey or silver or grey silver. Okay, but there is two exception, that is copper and gold. Exception is copper, which is having reddish brown color, and gold, that is having golden yellow color. Okay, so this is the exception. So these all are the physical properties of matter. Now let's start with non-metals. As you already know, what do you mean by non-metals? Just opposite to metals. The elements which are non-malleable, non-ductile, and are non-conductor of electricity, that is called non-metals. Or also you can say that those elements which have the tendency to make always the negative ions, whenever they combine with another element, they are having the tendency to make negative ions, that is called non-metals. So let's start the physical properties of non-metals. Yes, now let's start with the physical properties of non-metals. So just opposite to that metals. Okay, so first physical property of non-metal is non-metals are not malleable. Not malleable, as I have already told, that malleability means drawn into thin sheet. So non-metals cannot be drawn into thin sheet. If you hammer them, they will break into pieces. So they are brittle. They are not malleable. Instead, they are brittle. If you hammer them, they can be drawn into small pieces instead of sheet. Now, non-metals are not ductile. That means non-metals also cannot be drawn into thin wires. Okay, if you hammer them, they cannot be drawn into thin wires. Instead, they will break into pieces. That means they are brittle. Now, third is non-metals are bad conductors of heat and electricity. Yes, children, non-metals are very bad conductor of heat and electricity. That means they are not allowing heat and electricity to pass through them. But there is an exception. Graphite is a very good conductor of electricity. This is a form of carbon. And diamond, it is also a form of carbon and very good conductor of heat. Okay, so both graphite and diamond are good conductor of heat and electricity, and that is the exception. So now non-metals are not lustrous, dull in appearance. Yes children, non-metals are not lustrous, they don't have shiny appearance on their surface. Instead they are dull, and they cannot be polished also. So they are non-lustrous. Now non-metals are generally soft. Yes children, non-metals are generally soft. They are not as hard as metals, but there is one exception, that is the diamond. Yes, diamond is the only non-metal which is very hard. In fact, it is the hardest substance of this world. Okay, diamond is the exception. It is very hard. It is not a soft non-metal. But all the non-metals except diamond are soft in nature. Now here non-metals have low tensile strength. That means non-metals are not very strong. They cannot bear heavy load. Okay, so we can say that non-metals are having very low tensile strength. All the non-metals, if you put a heavy load on the non-metals, they can be broken down into pieces. Now comes to next one. Non-metals may be solid, liquid or gas at room temperature. Yes children, like metals are always exist in solid form except one, that is mercury. But non-metals can be exist in solid, liquid or gaseous form. For example, non-metals like sulfur, phosphorus, carbon, these all are solid at room temperature. Non-metals like bromine is the, remember children this one, bromine is the only non-metal which exists in liquid form. Okay, and bromine exists in liquid form in the normal room temperature, but the nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, chlorine, these all are existing gaseous form, which is also a non-metal. So non-metal may be solid, liquid or gas in normal room temperature. Okay, they can be existing any three form. Now, non-metals have low melting and boiling point. Yes children, non-metals are having low melting and boiling point. That means they melt and vaporize at a very low temperature. But there is an exception, that is the graphite. Graphite is the only non-metal which is having high melting point. Now comes to this one. Non-metals have low densities. Non-metals have low densities. That means they are not heavier. Whenever you put it on the water, it will float on water. But there is an exception. Yes, of course, iodine. Iodine is the only non-metal which is having high density. Now, non-metals are non-sonorous. Non-sonorous means if you strike on its surface, it will not produce any ringing sound. So that's why non-metals are non-sonorous in nature. Now, non-metals have many different colors. Yes children, as in metals we have studied that metals are generally occur in grey or silver in color, except two exception was there, that is the copper and gold. But in non-metals, in this type non-metals, the non-metals can be exist in many different color. For example, phosphorus exists in white or red color. Chlorine exists in greenish yellow color. Bromine exists in reddish brown color. Sulfur yellow color. Graphite black color. Nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, these all are colorless. So children, non-metals can be exist in many different color or maybe colorless. So I hope you all have understand the properties of metals and non-metals well. Now let's start with metalloids. Yes children, so metalloids. Metalloids are actually neither a metal nor a non-metal. They are different. For example, metalloids are those elements which show some properties of metals and some properties of non-metals. Like they are looking like a metal but they are brittle like a non-metal. They are neither a conductor like a metal but also nor a non-conductor like a non-metal. Instead, they are semiconductor. Okay, they are allowing the heat and electricity in a very small amount. Okay, they are semiconductor, and these metalloids are also called semi-metals. They are also called semi-metals. Why semi-metals? Because they are having appearance and some qualities of metals and some qualities of non-metals, both. So that's why they are the metalloids. For example, silicon, germanium, boron, etc. These all are the metalloids. Okay. So I think it is clear what do you mean by metalloids? Those elements which are neither a metal nor a non-metal. Instead, they have the properties of both metals and non-metals, that are called metalloids. And in the periodic table, if you see the periodic table of all the elements, the metalloids are also exist in the between place, between metals and non-metals. Okay, so I think this is enough for today, children, and we will continue our study for this chapter in our next video. So thank you and have a nice day.